Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to the Cheri Hill Show. I have special guests with me today because we're going to talk about outer space and lots of other cool things. My first guest is Rocket Tom Taormina, who spent 14 years at Mission Control in Houston, and also Brad Haddock, who was an engineer and manager in the aerospace industry for at least 30 years, but you did 21 missions at Mission Control. So you guys are as close to rocket scientists as I'll ever know.
People keep calling me that.
But no, you're an engineer. Always an engineer.
Always
right?
an engineer.
So way back when you were involved very early on with Let's Send a Man to the Moon.
I was in high school and I heard JFK say we're going to the moon by the end of this decade. He was talking to me. That was dialogue between he and I. And on my 19th birthday, I packed up my little car in New York City and headed to Houston and put myself through school, got a job, and pestered enough people at Mission Control until I got a job there. Spent the next 14 years evolving a career in Mission Control.
So Brad, were you part of that?
As a youngster, in the time frame that Tom was first there, that's when the seeds were planted. I pretty much did the same thing. I decided that I have to be an engineer or I have to be a scientist or something to find my way into this business. And I was lucky enough to get the help of companies that I was working for at the time to get into school and make that happen. And then, of course, later on, the push to build a space station was somewhat more diffused than the discussion and the speech from JFK. But you could see where it was all going. We were going to establish a permanent presence in orbit around the Earth, and we certainly have done that. In 2009, we accomplished that objective. So
I really feel like one of the most blessed people in the country because I had that initial motivation to be part of it. And then when I got there, I was writing process procedures that had never been written before, and we were building equipment that had never been thought of before. And so during that 14 years, there was this continual evolution from the most primitive, the computers were calculators. When I left, they were just getting to something that resembled maybe a TRS-80 computer. I didn't really understand during that time that we were just doing what we were trained to do. And that was to document what we do, train on it over and over again, do simulations, evaluate the results, make changes based on the empirical data that we got. And that has been the gift that I have had in seeing that we took thousands and thousands of people from scores of companies and governmental agencies, and we were working on one mission, all working on it together. And that has not been replicated since. And that's the lesson. That's what I've been doing for the last 40 years.
That seems interesting, and that's one of the things I've often said about our state and our nation. Where is that big goal? Where is this thing that we can all get behind and work on? And we only see it at certain times in our, nation when we have big disasters where people will rally around and be American. But let's talk about from that initial technology and infrastructure and everything that was built, and then going forward has, really impacted the way that we do pretty much everything around the world.
Absolutely. Early on, of course, it was Tang and space pens that were widely touted as the product of the space program. But the suits that the astronauts wore became bases for the new firemen's suits. We invented new materials. Tang said we invented something for space that we can actually use terrestrially. And then, since I left NASA in '80, the evolution has just been exponential in research and in discovery. And when we talk later about the space station, every day they're making breakthroughs, and nobody knows we're doing it. It goes out into the world as a noise level instead of being how we run our country. And the big lesson there for every business person is if you have an objective and you're committed to it, and you follow the plan that we followed for Project Apollo, which just so happens to be documented in my 12th book. It was rocket science, but the plan, the steps that we took to get to the moon are the exact same steps we need to use to pick another goal, whether it's medicine, whether it's economy, whether it's world hunger, and use the same model. It's there, it's proven, and we just don't do it.
Well, but you keep saying that, but how come it isn't happening? I mean, that's the big question for me. Why are there still hungry children? Why are there still nations that can't support themselves. You know, I spend a huge amount of time in the nonprofit world, and it's like, when do we ever actually get to solve something? We thought we solved polio, and then you have people that refuse to give their children the vaccination, and here comes polio again. I think maybe some of it is frustration. We keep throwing time and energy and money at it, but it's only a small collection of people focused on that one issue.
You couldn't be more on the money with that, because there are only a handful of people who have the nerve and the will to do that, to say failure is not an option. Gene Kranz told me that to my face when I was a young engineer at NASA. He said, "You are not going to hurt an astronaut, not on my watch, and we're going to get to the moon." And the astronaut that wrote forward for It Was Rocket Science was the Capcom during Apollo 13, and he says he's always asked the same question: what would happen if you couldn't get them back safely? He said, the thought never entered my mind. That's what's missing from our entire society now. You're working with nonprofits, I'm working with startups, and all they see is their narrow view of whatever it is they're trying to accomplish, and there's never any thought given. Does this better mankind? Do gift cards on the internet better the human race? I just got through with the Sontag Award judging, and I mean, they were all great people, but there was nothing profound in what they wanted to accomplish.
But the money doesn't seem to follow profound. Money seems to follow disruptive or what's interesting, and so yes, I'm always a little bit shocked where people spend their time and their energy and what they're focused on, and ask that same question: how does that improve the planet or people or any of it? We're talking about what was, right? We sent a man to the moon, brought him back, and so when we go into our next segment, I want to talk about what is today. And Brad, you'll have more input on that because you were part of the International Space Station. And a final thought on what we accomplished.
What we accomplished was establishing the fact that when you challenge Americans to the most outrageous, outlandish goals, we will do it if we work together in that same symbiotic environment that we created for Apollo. And we did that serendipitously. I don't remember someone teaching us how to do that, but when I started writing books about it many years later, after the Apollo 13 movie, it's so simple. It's so easy. There's 9 steps to it, and it's not as bad as withdrawing from alcohol. It's withdrawing from being self-centered, and everything's about profit, everything's about cutting costs, and if you do it right, they will come.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we have to go to break. We come back, we're going to pick up on this interesting conversation with Tom and Brad. Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to the Cheri Hill Show. I have special guests, Rocket Tom Taormina and Brad Haddock, who both spent many years through Mission Control in Houston. And Brad, you were an engineer and a manager in the aerospace industry for many years. I want to talk about the fact that the International Space Station is making major breakthroughs in science, medicine, food, and human evolution on nearly a daily basis. You mentioned that, but the average citizen is unaware of how profoundly their lives and world are changing as a result of the scientific research on the International Space Station. So I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of the International Space Station. Of course, many countries contribute into it. But Brad, what would you like to share with us about how important it is to us as human beings to have it?
I want to key off of something that you just said. The first thing is that not quite as many people know about International Space Station as you would think. As opposed to the Apollo missions, they were on TV in front of us every day. Space Station is surprising. About half of them don't have a clue what I'm talking about. I think it's important to get that elevated back to the level of the Apollo missions. And when you do that, the science that's going on up there it's just gonna pop. Everybody's gonna be seeing it. And the science that's going on up there is science that's not achievable in terrestrial labs. Having the absence of gravitational disturbances on Space Station allows us to do a lot of things that we can't do. Plant growth, how plants grow in zero-G is very, very different. Dr. Don Pettit, who is one of the astronauts and a friend of mine, used to have a blog that he did every day talking about his little friends, the plants that are growing on station. And if more people could be exposed to some of those things, I think they would gain a much greater appreciation for the science that's going on up there right now.
Well, don't you think, though, Neil deGrasse, who is the astrophysicist, has really brought back for young people, I think this ability to really dream about landing in the stars, but just learning how they affect everything we do here. So I think he's been a great influence on the young people. Maybe it's the middle generations that kind of missed out. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. And you know my long history as a management consultant, and everybody that's ever run a company has gone to some seminar or workshop and gotten all wound up about what they're going to do when they get home, and that when they get back to the office, it's business as usual. The same metaphor is that they hear about it, but then there's no follow-up. If you don't immediately have a program in place to take the information and say, this affects you because the shot you just got would not have been there if we hadn't done the research in space station. That's what's missing.
Some of the protein growth, crystalline protein growth that's going on space station right now is exactly what Tom just said. There are therapies that are coming down from things that we've discovered on station that wouldn't be possible otherwise. There have been discoveries on space station in zero-G that have taught us how to do the same thing on Earth, which is really cool because then you don't have to establish a factory out in low Earth orbit in order to do the same thing, because we discovered something up there that allows you to grow that same phenomenal therapy in a dish here on the planet.
We talked about earlier in the first segment how people have a goal or a vision together, but I mean, that's why it's called the International Space Station, because it really is a global effort.
Yeah, and it's been interesting because, like Tom said in talking about Apollo, we all got together around JFK's imperative and we established a direction. Establishing a direction in the international community has been a little bit more difficult. There are a lot of other agendas out there, but even through all that, we were able to establish the most important thing, and that is the vision, to get what is it that we're going to do, and the vision that we're going to do. And then all the things that fall from that vision, we're at least able to get everybody on the same page, all the different countries that have participated in it, rallying around that vision. It's a substantial accomplishment in itself.
And of course, you know, for those that have been paying attention to the Mars rover and all the cool shots coming back, and we see little blips in the paper on occasion, and it just reminds us of how we're spinning around on a little dust ball here.
And all that eclectic stuff is wonderful, but the problem is we are in such huge information overload today because we can instantly communicate with any place in the world. When a bomb goes off in London, you can see at the same instant tons and tons of information moving through your wheelhouse every day. And how do you absorb all that? So this is noise. This stuff about what's going on in the space
But
station.
what can I actually do? I mean, I can't just go get in a spacecraft and go fly out to the moon. So meanwhile, it's interesting and, of course, can be inspiring for a lot of young people. What really can I do with this information? When the rover sends back photos of Mars, it's fascinating, but what do I do with it?
That you have created a number of opportunities for the younger folks, and something will click. Something's going to say, that is really cool, I want to do something about it. And if we don't provide the learning environment, respond immediately to that youngster that says, wow, I want to be a nuclear physicist, or I just went to the doctor and I had this incredible machine and I want to be part of that, then they move on to the next thing that they see 5 minutes later. So it's the follow-up. It's looking at the pictures from Mars and saying, we did that. We say, holy cow, there's a guy standing on Mars.
Well, but I guess my question is, we're not dreaming big enough. See, when I think of everything that's being invented and developed, that my refrigerator now knows when I'm out of milk, that doesn't really excite me.
And sends you a text message.
Right? To go, what if somebody said, okay, great, let's focus the same resources, money and energy and talent and skills on what do we do with this information that we're receiving from these deep space probes that we're firing out there, to go, here's something in the future that you could be working on. Who's that visionary?
It does not exist, especially after this last election.
Well, what about Elon Musk?
Well, Elon is a visionary. He takes action, and he is, I'm going to do it. I made up my mind. And just as in Apollo, the people that work for him would probably work for free just to be able to be part of that energy field. And so he's created it in cars, he's creating it in the private sector development of space. But again, the question is, where is someone that says, I want to end global hunger? That's the mission. Okay, folks, here's the mission plan, here's the vision, here's the value set, here's the metric, and we're going to do that because we need that if we're going to colonize Mars. And we need to colonize Mars because we're going to run out of natural resources on Earth. So it's a complete circle. But there's no one standing up in front of the cameras saying, by gosh, we're going to Mars. And we are, and it's being done. We're developing the spacecraft. We haven't conquered cosmic rays yet. That's the big hold up, is not killing them on the way to Mars with cosmic rays. But we'll fix it. We'll solve it. If we have the vision to do something like going to Mars, we're going to solve propulsion issues. We're going to solve food issues. We're going to solve energy issues. And all of a sudden, those will become the spin-offs. And we won't be fighting over oil, gas, fracking.
Nuclear weapons.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
But there's no JFK out there delivering that vision anymore.
Right.
That person does not exist in our society right now. No.
And if he did, to me, it's like if God came back down to Earth and said, I'm God, there'd be somebody on CNN saying, no, I don't think so. That's we haven't got reliable sources.
Right. All right. Well, we blew through this show, so hopefully our listeners will tune in next week because we're going to pick up this conversation. I want to talk about the Nevada Challenger Learning Center and some other great things that are going on with regards to space and opportunity and what's going on. So Brad, thank you for being here. Tom, thank you for being here. You're going to come back because we didn't finish this conversation.